Hey everybody, welcome to Limited Principles Episode 4 on Wolverine Fierce Fighter. What to watch for as you build around that card from Marvel Superheroes with your first pick. Limited Principles is a podcast about your principal pack one pick ones. You finally get that sweet mythic rare and uncommon now what? And by popular demand, we had some requests a couple of episodes ago. We had done a draft walkthrough to kind of show how do we end up with a deck with this card. And we're actually going to revisit from our last episode the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl and some decks that came about and kind of a proof of concept of what we're trying to accomplish with this podcast. Later on, in a few weeks, we'll be in late format and spoiler season. We'll be looking at some of the principal or staple cards of Limited. The cards that get addressed by their OG names by experienced players and when they've been good and bad and why throughout various formats. So that's coming in a few weeks. And Limited Principles is about me, your host, because I am a school principal. So let's revisit Squirrel Girl and do a draft walkthrough here. So this is a little bit of a shout out and a callback to episode 3 on the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl. If you haven't watched that yet, go back and catch it. But here was a deck that trophied in between last episode and this one for me using Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, and we'll talk a little bit about how we got here. If you're watching this on YouTube or on Spotify with video, for example, you'll see some splash cards here, and you might pick up on, oh, there's Superhero Civil War in this deck. Well, that must be why you won all the games. Superhero Civil War was only drawn in 2 games and only responsible for 1 of the 7 victories. So it was a factor in the deck, but certainly not the factor. And let's walk through this a little bit. And this is a particularly interesting example because how did we end up here? Well, Pack 1 Pick 1 was Origin of the Avengers, the 1 and a white saga that scries 2 and then puts a hero with mana value 3 or less from your hand into the battlefield or draws a card and then puts a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. And this was a card we called out last week in the Squirrel Girl episode because it's one of the cards that permanently pumps your team. And then Pack 1 Pick 2 was Stature Size Shifter, the single blue 1/1 that can't be blocked and can power up later. Pack 1 Pick 3 was Black Widow Super Spy, the 1 and a black 2/1 with Menace, the mythic rare that when it deals combat damage, you start stealing your opponent's cards from the top of their deck. And I had some white or blue cards that I could have picked instead of this, but the power level difference with Black Widow was great enough that I decided to pick it. As a matter of fact, one of the possible picks was Hero in Training, which is a fantastic white card. But I had recently played a couple of draft decks with Black Widow, and it might be my favorite 2-drop in the entire format. Because if it gets on board, it can almost always attack on turn 3 because your opponent probably only has 1 creature down at that point. And so the Menace lets it get past. And then it's growing or maybe playing an opponent's 2-drop or exiling a key card for them. It's just super annoying to play against if you can't remove it right away. So the idea here was also part of the tiebreaker, I guess, was that Black Widow is a hero. And so Origin of the Avengers can play it for free. And so even if you splash it, you can get around it being on the off color, even on an early turn. Pack 1 Pick 4 was Kid Loki, the single blue 1/1 uncommon that gives creatures that got +1/+1 counters this turn hexproof, and it gains counters itself when you draw your second card each turn. Pack 2 Pick 5 didn't have a whole lot in it, but I took 2 Evil to Stay Dead, the 2 and a black sorcery with Teamwork 4 that lets you bring back a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. And I was thinking a little bit along the lines of bringing back Black Widow here, but again, there really wasn't much in this pack. Pack 1 Pick 6 was Raft Security Officer, the 1 and a white 1/3 that taps your opponent's creatures down. Pack 1, pick 7 was giant-sized flying ant, the 3 and a blue 3/2 flash flyer that taps or untaps something. Pack 1, pick 8 was burrow backup, the 4 and a white sorcery that creates the 2/3/2 white hero creature tokens with vigilance. So you can see we're in kind of an all-over-the-place draft here. We've got some white cards, some blue cards, some black cards. There's no clear direction yet. Pack 1, pick 9, crowd of 2 believers, the fine single white 1/2 that taps to give target creature you control that's attacking alone +1/+0 till end of turn and you gain 1 life. Plays well with Black Widow, for example, or anything that you'd like to have attacking alone. And then the only other notable pick in Pack 1 was Shield Helicarrier at pick 11, creating 2 1/1 soldier creature tokens. And that's because we already had a token maker in Burrow Backup and Origin of the Avengers. If we end up in a token direction, we saw last week that Shield Helicarrier in particular plays well in Azorius white-blue token decks. And then we got to Pack 2, pick 1. And I laid out here a whole list of or at least some of the cards that we saw, for example, at the beginning of Pack 2. So the mythic at the front of the list was the unbeatable Squirrel Girl. And of course we would take a triple green card when all of the cards we have are white or blue or black, right? But look at the rest of the cards in the pack. I didn't show all of them, but I showed the relevant ones. I showed all the uncommons. Whiplash, Vengeful Engineer, Speed, Young Avenger, and Hercules, Prince of Power. Nothing particularly exciting in the uncommons, and especially nothing exciting in the colors we have. The 2 white cards in the pack were Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Wakandan Drone Flock. Unexciting commons. Drone Flock is fine. It's a fine 4-drop. And Hydraulic Helper, the 1 and a blue 2/3 defender, artifact creature in blue. There's nothing here incentivizing us to take white or blue. So I just took Squirrel Girl because we already had some white token-making cards. And it's by far the most powerful card in the pack. And I'm thinking, you know, it's triple green. I have no other green cards. Maybe I won't play it. But then Pack 2, pick 2 was Monica Rambeau, the 2 and a white 3/3 with flying and prowess that can transform for 2 red, white, white into Photon, which is the hexproof flying prowess creature that's virtually unbeatable in this set. And now I have a lot of incentive to be white. I really want to know what someone picked Pack 2, pick 1 over Monica Rambeau. There are so few cards that I can imagine. Maybe Dr. Doom and they were already in black or something like that. I don't know. But what a fantastic card to end up in a pick 2. And then Pack 2, pick 3 was Black Panther Vanguard, the 2 green-white 4/4 that we talked about a lot last week with Squirrel Girl, that plays really well with tokens, and we've already got a white token thing going on a little bit. Pack 2, pick 8, going later in the draft, still had Hercules, Prince of Power, the 2 and a green 3/3 that powers up to gain Vigilance, Indestructible, and Haste until end of turn, along with a green-white land and a Gorilla, the green 2/2, showing that green was still pretty open late in Pack 2. And then Pack 3, pick 1, we got rewarded with Superhero Civil War. But the point is that by the end of Pack 2, we already had a very strong green-white deck. And so I was ready to abandon any and all of the blue and black cards that we picked before that and just go in a green-white direction. And I just went into Pack 3 already feeling like I had plenty of power in the deck. Squirrel Girl, Monica Rambeau, Black Panther, Superhero Civil War, etc. Even things like Black Widow, the black rare that we picked earlier. Plenty of power in the deck. But in order to play the most powerful cards possible, I super prioritized fixing in Pack 3. Maybe we get there, maybe we don't. And so here was the deck. It was base green with 6 white cards, 3 black cards, and 2 red cards. Prioritizing fixing. And you can see some of the fixing that got picked up if you're watching this. Otherwise, I'll call out some things here. We only got 1 undercover scroll, but we did get 1. We got 2 copies of Ant-Man's Army, the 2 in a green, 3/2 that can make a treasure or a food. I played 2 dependable Quinjets in this deck, again to improve the fixing. I played 1 copy of Restorative Technique, the 2 in a green sorcery that lets you gain 2 life, search for a basic, put it on tapped. That's a great card to ramp into Superhero Civil War, for example, because it's 3 ramping to 5. And I played a Surveillance Room, the Surveil land that lets you filter 1 mana of any color. I played a white-black Fisk Tower. Played a single mountain, a single swamp, 8 forests, 5 plains. Less green that I'd like to play for Squirrel Girl, but we talked last week about the fact that Squirrel Girl is fine being played not on curve on turn 4, because a lot of times you'd be totally fine playing Squirrel Girl, for example, on turn 8 if you can figure out a way to activate her twice. And there was enough fixing and enough any mana color fixing, like Treasures or Quinjets or Skrull in this deck, that I had multiple games where I played Squirrel Girl on turn 8 and activated her immediately. And all of a sudden you have 4 squirrels, or 5 if you have Undercover Scroll turned on, and it becomes all creature types, again, like we talked about last week. So the idea was, when I drafted Squirrel Girl in Pack 2 Pick 1, even though I didn't have any other cards of that color, I recognized the pieces that I already had that played well with Squirrel Girl, because the research going into last week's episode prepared me to know what cards played well, like Origin of the Avengers and Burrow Backup and Shield Helicarrier. And some of those cards are not as obvious as others. It needed last week to be able to talk about those things. And Black Panther being, for example, an enabler and a payoff. So this was, again, proof of concept of what I'm trying to provide for you in this podcast, in these episodes. That it's not just the card that we focus on, it's the package of cards that go together, and realizing that you're prepared to take a certain card, or wait a minute, I know that these cards play well together and play into a token strategy, or these cards, this combination of cards wants this other color, or things like that. So this is what it's doing for me, and I hope that it's doing the same for you. And let's see what more we can explore this week with our focus card, which is Wolverine Fierce Fighter. The red-green 4-drop rare, the 3/5 with haste, legendary mutant berserker hero. When Wolverine enters, he fights up to one other target creature, and if damage would be dealt to Wolverine instead, that damage is dealt, but all other damage already dealt to him is healed, the undefined keyword. Healed, kind of. Wolverine has a 63.8% win rate. It is the number 6 card in the entire set. Like Superhero Civil War and Doctor Doom and cards like that are ahead of it. It is number 6 in the whole set. And yet it is in red-green, which is the least drafted color pair in the set. To give you some impression, like in the last week, 22,000 white-blue decks have been drafted, and 3,300 red-green decks have been drafted. So it's being drafted 3/20 seconds. The ratio is 3 to 22 for red-green to blue-white. And yet this card is sitting there, and it's number 6 in the whole set. Now, it's obviously a very splashable card, because it's only got a single red pip and a single green pip. And touching green means you're even easier to splash because of green's fixing tools. But we're going to explore today the viability of red-green as a color pair. I think it's being pretty heavily underdrafted. Red-green's currently got like a 53.5% win rate, which is below par for 17 lands users, for example. But there's a lot of viability to red-green, especially if you first pick Wolverine. Like, you already have the key piece to red-green functioning, and we're going to talk about what cards you want with it. So, what do we care about when we play Wolverine? We care about playing Wolverine on curve or earlier. Wolverine's great when you play it on turn 4 and it fights, and then you can immediately attack with it. And you can usually safely attack because you fight, you take some damage, But if your opponent makes the mistake of thinking, oh, I'll block and deal the rest of damage and kill it, you forget the fact that Wolverine heals whenever it dealt damage again. So basically, like let's say you bring in Wolverine and you it's 3-5 and you fight your opponent's 3-3 and therefore you take 3 damage. And Wolverine's showing as a 3-2 on screen, being damaged down to 2. But then your opponent's like, haha, I'll block you with my 2-2 when you attack post-fight. And then you attack and your opponent's 2-2 blocks into Wolverine. But before the 2 damage is healed, or before the 2 damage is dealt from the 2-2, the 3 damage that Wolverine took earlier when fighting is healed. And so therefore Wolverine doesn't die and you end up eating another creature. That mistake's going to happen. People will make that mistake. But the point is if you play it on curve, you're almost always going to be able to fight and then be able to attack in. And sometimes if you can ramp to Wolverine with tools we'll see in a little bit, then you can play Wolverine on 3 and then you're really talking, because a 3-5 haste body is a pretty decent attacker for a few turns after that if you play it on turn 3. One of the other things I want to point out right away about Wolverine and fighting, Wolverine lines up so well against blue and white in this format because there's so many 2-2, 2-1, 3-2, 2-3 blue and white creatures, especially some of the most popular ones. Think about like Shield Deployment Drone, the 2-2 in blue that's in the air. Yes, it makes a 1-1 soldier, but Wolverine just wins fights against so many blue and white cards and so many of the like common and uncommon and commonly played blue and white cards, including even things like rares. A little later on, we're going to see the Mighty Thor, the blue-white rare, because we're going to talk about how that interacts with Wolverine, even though you'll rarely be playing all 4 of those colors. But the Mighty Thor is a super annoying card to deal with, and if you don't have removal in hand. But Wolverine fights it, and the 3-5 wins against the 3-3. And very often your opponents will want to play Mighty Thor on curve to be able to get it out and allow her to start attacking. So anyway, it lines up super well, and that's one of the reasons I think it has such a high win rate, is that blue and white are being played so popularly, but Wolverine comes in and fights and kills a huge percentage of the creatures being played in blue and white, especially the flyers. So because we care about playing Wolverine on curve and we'd like Wolverine to fight and then attack, you want to lean aggressive with this deck. And also you'd be interested in potentially bouncing or replaying Wolverine because Wolverine fights on enter. And so we'll talk about the tools that you can use to do that. And then you care about other fight spells because if you're building your deck in such a way that that you have a creature that wants to fight, like what other fight spells are there? And why do we care about this? I mean, you could play the fight spells in any deck. But if you have Wolverine do the fighting, then that whole advantage of like Wolverine fights and then can attack in combat and heals the damage that was obtained from fighting can be used again with other fight spells. So we'll look at those. And then obviously, if you have other fight spells in your deck because the fight spells play well Wolverine, like Wolverine fights well, he is a fierce fighter after all, then that means you also care about other creatures that fight well. So why do we want to play Wolverine on curve or earlier? Well, we talked about the reasons that we want to do that, and we talked about Wolverine being easy to splash, but I want to emphasize that there's a trade-off. We'd like to play Wolverine on curve and start attacking, and at minimum be turning the tables on like turn 4 or turn 3 if we can. But I showed a picture here of the hypergeometric calculator, anticipating, like, let's say that you have a green X deck, green white, green black, green blue, and the only card you're splashing is Wolverine. So you're splashing for the single red pip of Wolverine, and therefore you're being a responsible splasher, and you have at least 3 red sources in your deck, like a mountain and 2 other things that are doing it. Well, let's assume you have Wolverine in your opening hand. And therefore, if you're on the play, you're going to have 9 other cards that you're going to see by the time you get to turn 4. If you're on the play, there'll be 10 cards you'd see if you're on the draw, but there's 9 other cards that you're going to see. And so we're putting 3 successes in the population. Like, you've got 3 lands out of those 9 cards, the 7 in your hand plus the 2 you're going to draw if you're on the play, that aren't named Wolverine. Or I should say the 6 in your hand that aren't Wolverine plus the 3 you're going to draw between turns 1 and 4. And you just want one of those red sources to appear so that you can play Wolverine on curve. You have a roughly 55% chance of drawing one of those cards. You're only slightly over 50% to play Wolverine on curve if you're splashing Wolverine. And you also have to figure that a lot of times you're going to be playing something like a tap land, like Los Diablos Missile Base. And so what if you draw that on turn 4 when you want to be playing Wolverine? Well, now you have to wait a turn. Or maybe you are playing Surveillance Room, which doesn't come in tapped, but you have to spend a mana and tap Surveillance Room to get the mana of any color. In other words, you kind of lose a land. So you still can't play Wolverine on curve. So even some of these successes might not allow you to play Wolverine on curve. So what we want to talk about is like the red and green fixing and ramping tools. Like, what does this look like if you play Wolverine in red-green, and why are there some of the advantages? Well, for example, if you play Undercover Skrull, now this would be true in any green X deck, so let's be fair about that. But if you play Undercover Skrull, well, if you play Skrull on turn 2, then you can immediately ramp to Wolverine on turn 3. Like, this is the cleanest way to play Wolverine on curve, actually earlier than curve. In red, you have Stark Industries Executive. So I'm not so much thinking red X here. I'm thinking if you're red-green. If you play Stark Industries Executive on 1 and you give up your turn on turn 2 to tap the Executive and pay 2 to create a treasure token, then you can play Wolverine on 3 by using your 3rd land and the treasure. So it's not as clean as the Skrull because you have to give up your turn 2, where Skrull is being played on 2, and you could potentially play something else on turn 1. Ant-Man's Army, the 2 and a green 3/2 that can create a food or a treasure when it enters. It doesn't ramp, obviously, because you have to play Army on turn 3, but it does clean up the mana. So that would allow you to splash and play Wolverine on turn 4, even with a green X deck. But even in a red-green deck, let's say you haven't found a mountain yet, Ant-Man's Army would allow you to still play it cleanly on turn 4. And then less obvious is a card like Rapid Rescue, the single green instant that mills 2 cards, and you put a permanent from among them into your hand and you gain 2 life. That lets you dig for a red source at some point on turns 1, 2, or 3. And then clunky but functional are the land cyclers. And I've pictured here Savage Land Dinosaur, the 4 green 7/6 basic land cycles for 2, and the Kree Sentinel, that's the red land cycler. Obviously other land cyclers would work too in other colors if you're splashing. I like the Dinosaur the best because the Dinosaur is the creature I would most want to potentially rebuy from my graveyard. There are some decks that want to do that or encourage you doing that. So I like that a little bit better than the Sentinel, but they both function. They can both do the job. So what kind of game are you playing? You're aggressive leaning. You're playing this creature that wants to come in on curve or a little earlier, wants to fight, and then wants to attack. So you would like to attack early or set yourself up to swing the game on turn 4. So what I'm going to show here is the different 1, 2, and 3 drops that I'm looking for when I've already first picked Wolverine. And I'm going to focus again on red-green here and how to make this viable in that color pair, because with such a low number of decks being drafted, it's the most infrequently drafted color pair. It means that you're going to have lots of red and green cards to pick from. So The one drop I'm looking for is Stark Industries Executive, the red 1/2 that can pay 2 and tap to create a treasure token. Because it has the potential to play on 1, tap to make a treasure on 2, ramp me to Wolverine on 4 if I have Wolverine in hand. If I don't have Wolverine in hand, then maybe I'm interested in playing a 2-drop instead of tapping for the treasure. But we're going to see another 1-drop later. We're going to see the green 1/1 Death Toucher for other reasons because it fights well. But I'm not prioritizing that card. If I end up with it, like, fine, filling a slot, especially if I need more low drops to fill out my curve. But the card I'd really like to have is even multiple copies of Stark Industries Executive. 2-drops. I'm also not focusing on rares and mythics here. There are plenty of rares, especially at the 2-drop slot, like the rare Hawkeye, for example, that I'd love to have. But I'm focusing mainly on commons and uncommons here. In commons and uncommons, the 2-drop I'm most interested in this deck is Hellcat Undying Vigilante, the green 2/2 with haste. That when Hellcat dies, return her to the battlefield under her owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on her. She loses all abilities and gains haste. Because Hellcat can attack right away, and your opponent has awkward decisions to make about whether or not they're going to block Hellcat, because they really don't want to turn Hellcat into a 3/3 early in the game. And so what happens is Hellcat occupies a role very similar to Wolverine. Your opponent has awkward blocks and doesn't really want to block Wolverine when Wolverine attacks because of the whole healing thing. It's awkward, at least in early turns. And Hellcat's very much the same. So you start to get in, you start to get some early damage, and if you're playing red-green, the nice thing is you're touching a color that has several tools for direct damaging your opponent to, like, finish them off later. Things like Lightning Strike, deal 3 to the face. Things like Truck Toss, deal 4 to the face. These things, red has a lot of tools for direct damaging and potentially finishing your opponent off. And so the ability to get in for early damage and make awkward blocking decisions where often your opponent doesn't want to block is really good. A card I like, but a little bit, actually decent amount less than Hellcat, is Misty Knight, Hero for Hire, the one in a red 3/1 that can pay 2 and tap to discard a card and draw a card for each card you've discarded this turn. It has some value late because it allows you to rummage late, but it attacks well as a 2-drop that's a 3/1. A lot of times if you can get it down on turn 2 and you're on the play, you can get in for 3. And then later on, Misty Knight can sit there. It can be a 3-power blocker, and if it's not doing that job, it can tap later and help you rummage for things later in the game. 3-drops, we already talked about Ant-Man's Army and its value. But I also like Hercules, Prince of Power, the 2 and a green 3/3 that powers up. Only costs 2 more the turn it comes in to power up to make it basically a 4/4 with vigilance, indestructible, and haste. So it becomes a creature that a perfectly viable 3-drop, like play it for 3 on play it as a 3/3 on turn 3, and it can probably attack in several games in that state. Or you can play it on turn 5 and all of a sudden you've got a 4/4 indestructible attacker out of nowhere. Plays into the plan. Other 3-drops that I like, Titania, Rugged Rumbler, has a great win rate in red-green. That's the 2 and a hybrid black-green 5/5 that has an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card, or pay 2. So you're very happy often in this kind of deck to play that 5/5 on turn 3 and discard a card. Your opponent has to pay the same cost, ward, discard a card, or pay 2 to target Titania. So even if they're going to spend a removal spell, you're not 2-for-1ing yourself by playing Titania because you're spending 2 cards to play it on turn 3, and then your opponent has to spend 2 cards to remove it. So you're not card disadvantaging yourself in that way. And Titania is a really good fighter, and with, like, fight spells and bite spells, and is a very good early threat. And then Spider-Man to the Rescue, the 2 and a hybrid green-white 3/2 with Flash, Vigilance, and Reach. When Spider-Man enters, you may tap him. When you do, another target non-attacking creature you control gains indestructible until end of turn. This is where I'd like to point out that when your creature is fighting because of a fight spell, your creature is not attacking. Spider-Man can take one of your big buff creatures like Titania and make Titania indestructible when she's blocking something, and your opponent is going to death touch it and try to remove it or whatever. But Spider-Man can rescue Wolverine when Wolverine's in a fight. So there's a lot of utility to Spider-Man, and Spider-Man's body being a 3/2 for 3 makes it a viable fighter and attacker like Ant-Man's army. So if you have creatures, so we're playing a game where we want to be aggressive, we want to attack. We need a higher creature count because you need creatures in order to use things like fight spells and bite spells. So creatures plus aggressive combat plus fighting means we should consider combat tricks because they can help us in combat, and they can help us push damage at key moments, and they can help us win fights. So the number 1 card I'm looking at in that role is Blazing Crescendo, the 1 in a red instant. Target creature gets +3/+1 until end of turn. Exile the top card of your library, and until the end of your next turn, you may play that card. That makes Wolverine a 6/6 and provides card advantage, which is more scarce in these colors. Giant Growth has been underperforming in this set compared to other sets where it's appeared. Some people have talked about Giant Growth seems to be shrinking in its effect. Haha. Single green instant, target creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn, but I'd like to point out that it's cheap at a single mana, and it's got a 55.2% win rate overall. Like, it's a C-level card. It is not embarrassing to play this card, and it has the biggest plus to the win rate in red-green. The biggest boost to the color pair's win rate is in red-green. In other words, it helps red-green decks more than it helps any other deck. So this is a strong place to consider it. And then Team Tactics, the 1 in a red instant that gives target creature double strike until end of turn. That's very helpful in combat, obviously. And then if this spell was cast using Teamwork, the teacher also gains trample. Teamwork 1. Decent finisher. It's not great, and its win rate is poor overall, but Team Tactics likes Hulks, and there's lots of Hulks in red and green, and it's playable in red-green, and basically isn't in any other color pair. Like, again, it's a non-embarrassing card in red-green. It basically matches red-green's win rate, but it's so it's not great. But if you're looking for a combat trick in your deck, like you'd like that to round out the kind of the variety of cards in your deck and your optionalities, and you don't have a Blazing Crescendo or a Giant Growth, just understand that Team Tactics is not embarrassing in red-green like it is in other color pairs. All right, bouncing and replaying, because if Wolverine and Wolverine's ability to surprise fight is sweet when you first play the card, wouldn't it be nice if you could replay it or get it back from your graveyard or bounce it and do it again? Well, your only option to do that, if you're playing red-green without splashing, is Call Damage Control. The 1 in a green sorcery, choose up to 2, and return 2 of among an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, and a land to your hand. It is the only non-splash, but it is a massive trap in red-green. It seems like, well, great, like turn 6, I rebuy Wolverine for 2, and then I play Wolverine for 4, and Wolverine gets to fight again. First, you should think about what Wolverine is fighting on turn 6, because it's coming in as a 3/5, and it's probably not fighting your opponent's 5-drop or 6-drop, because they're stronger than Wolverine is. Like, on turn 6, what you would want to be doing if you had Wolverine in hand is you want to be playing Wolverine, for example, going into the fight, playing Blazing Crescendo to turn Wolverine into a 6/6, winning that fight, and exiling a card you can play the next turn. Call Damage Control has an absolutely pathetic 46.8% win rate in red-green. It's so bad. Like, you want to avoid playing this card unless you have like some epic card of another category other than creature that you can also get back. Like, I don't know, Cosmic Cube or something, like the mythic 5-mana artifact. And even then, I'm still not sure I would play it. Because Call Damage Control wants to play a longer game where it's attrition-y and stuff's dying and you're getting stuff back from the graveyard. And Red-Green does not want a long game. Red-Green is not as a super aggro deck in that it doesn't have to win games by turn 6 in order to not lose. Because it's touching green, for example. It can play a mid-rangey game. It's like, you know, got stompy stuff in it. So it can win games by, you know, turns 8 or 9 and be perfectly comfortable. That overwhelming an opponent at that point. But it does not have the late game tools that other colors do, especially in this format. And so you don't want to play a game long enough for Call Damage Control to get 2 viable things back, and then you play them on the next 2 turns or on turn 9 or 10 or 11. You don't really want to play that game. Ares God of War is an interesting card to splash with black. The 1 black-red 4/3 that attacks each combat if able, and whenever an attacking creature you control dies, and that does not mean Ares has to attack, by the way. Ares could come in and then, like Wolverine, could attack. Return that card to its owner's hand. So that's a cheap way of getting Wolverine back if they kill Wolverine, and again, makes your opponent's decisions tough, makes the blocks difficult. We have some one-time rebuyers. All of these are splashes, so you need to think that if you're going to bounce or replay Wolverine, you're probably splashing. Decoy Ploy, the 1 in a black instant that, among other things, lets you return target hero from your graveyard to your hand. Wolverine's a hero. Shield Flying Car, the 2 in a blue 3/3 flash flying vehicle. When it enters, exile a creature and return it you control and return it at the beginning of the next end step. So that lets you bounce Wolverine out of trouble or out of being bound up by a frozen in ice or something like that, and return it, and then Wolverine can fight something else at the end of the turn. I put Shield Flying Car in here, and not Justice, the blue bounce spell. Like, Justice can bounce too, but Shield Flying Car doing it at instant speed is great, because it saves Wolverine and then allows Wolverine to re-enter and fight. And also, it's not to be overlooked that Shield Flying Car is a vehicle, because you have cards like Truck Toss in red that costs 4 mana, but it's 2 cheaper if you control a vehicle. And this is a great vehicle to splash and play that accomplishes a couple of different purposes. And then I want to give some attention too to Too Evil to Stay Dead, the 2 in a black sorcery that lets you choose target creature card in your graveyard with mana value 4 or less and return it to the battlefield. The Teamwork 4 on it lets you choose target creature card and return anything, but Wolverine himself is an awfully good mana value 4 or less card to return from the graveyard to the battlefield. And so Too Evil to Stay Dead lets you rebuy Wolverine for 1 less mana. And it's a definite, I think, consideration for inclusion. I wouldn't splash black only to play that card, but let's say that you're already splashing black to play some good removal or black touching bomb or something like that, and you've got the fixing to be able to support multiple black cards, then Too Evil to Stay Dead, I think, is a strong consideration. And then multi-timers, like things that will let you activate Wolverine's enters and fight ability multiple times. At Uncommon, we have Wiccan Rising Magician, the 4 in a blue 4/4 flyer that will basically bounce to end step something you control whenever you cast a non-creature spell. It's at Uncommon, it's a 4/4 flyer, which makes it a finisher, and because it's a high mana cost card, it's a safer splash because you can wait until later in the game to play it. There's a little bit of counteraction happening here with your plan in the deck, because you want to play a creature-heavy deck, and you're not going to have a ton of non-creatures to be able to activate or trigger Wiccan. But you probably only need to do that once or twice, bouncing Wolverine, to be happy with it. Then we have the Mighty Thor Jane Foster. That's the 1 white blue 3/3 flyer. Whenever the Mighty Thor attacks, exile up to 1 target non-token artifact or creature, yours or your opponent's, and then return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. The benefit here is that it returns immediately, but it returns tapped, which means you can't attack with Wolverine the turn that you're doing this. Or if Wolverine was attacking, Wolverine isn't attacking anymore. Now, you may not care about Wolverine attacking as much, but you also have color problems. Like, you probably need to be in like green-blue splashing white and red already, or green-white splashing red and blue already. You have to be pretty colorful to be pulling off both of these cards. This is not going to happen. This is not going to happen very often. I'm just pointing out that it's a way to do it. And then there's the Mind Stone. There's a lot of times that you're playing red-green where you'll be splashing white already for, let's say, Superhero Civil War, or like white removal spells like Murdoch's Crusade or Web Up. And if you're already doing that and you happen to get a Mind Stone passed to you, or you open a Mind Stone at the beginning of a pack, then obviously getting the Mind Stone, harnessing it later, that lets you play some late game shenanigans by, bouncing Wolverine at your end step every turn and fighting, picking off smaller creatures your opponents control. The nice thing about Mind Stone is it does it at end step and returns it at end step. So Wolverine can be attacking during a turn and not sacrifice an attack to be bounced. So other creatures that like fights in red-green. This is where we'll talk about Serpent Specialist, the single green 1/1 with Death Touch. It's a Death Toucher, so Death Touchers like to fight. It's going to win any fight where it's not otherwise instant speed removed by your opponent. But the reason I don't prioritize this 1-drop is that I want my early drop creatures to also be able to attack and pick in for some damage ahead of time, and Serpent Specialist is better to sit there as a blocker. So I wouldn't prioritize that card, but it certainly is going to play well with fight spells that you have. In the uncommons, we have Red Hulk. Red Hulk loves to fight. The 6/7 for 4 red, that when it's dealt damage, put a counter on him, and then you can deal damage equal to the number of counters to any other target. And there's obviously the well-known by now Red Hulk and Photon Blast Barrage, nearly always game-winning combo that exists. So again, remember, you're in a color pair that's not picked very often, and so you're going to have access to those cards very often. And you probably already want a Photon Blast Barrage in your deck because it's the currently best performing red removal spell. Hawkeye Young Avenger. This is the uncommon Hawkeye, the 3 and a red 2/4 with Reach. If a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, like for example if you are fighting or doing damage with a bite spell, instead it deals that much damage plus X, where X is Hawkeye's power. So if Hawkeye's on board and Wolverine comes in, Wolverine is fighting and dealing 5 when it fights instead of dealing 3. And all of a sudden then, Hawkeye on 4 and Wolverine on a later turn makes Wolverine a viable fighter, even against opponents like, let's say, 4, 5, 6 drops. And then Abomination, Terrifying Titan. That's the 3 and a hybrid red-green 4/4 with Trample that has the power-up ability, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it fights up to 1 target creature an opponent controls. I'm putting a question mark on this card. You'll find this card in a lot of like red and green trophy decks. If you look on 17 lands and look through some of them, we'll see some of them later in the episode. But Abomination has like a 55% win rate. It's like average in the format, a little higher than red greens normally is. So it's a better than average card in red green. But I don't see this as any kind of a requirement card. There's lots of ways to blow out Abomination, and if you think about it, Abomination fights in the opposite way that Wolverine does, because unless you're on turn 7 where you can play Abomination and power him up and immediately fight with him, you are not surprise fighting with Abomination. Like, you play Abomination on 4 as a 4/4, okay, fine, it's a body. 4/4 with trample. But Abomination's fight ability with power up is not a surprise. Your opponent can see it coming. And that creates some awkwardness where do you want to keep it in your hand and surprise fight with it, but you need the 4/4 for 4, and otherwise you're going to have to pay 7 later. Basically, I think there are other better ways in red and green to accomplish the kind of thing that Abomination is doing for you. I would, for example, basically 100% of the time play Pet Avengers over Abomination in these decks. Pet Avengers being the 4/4 that can come in with an extra body at turn 7. I can play Pet Avengers on 4 and fight with it with a fight spell or a bite spell, just like I can play Abomination. The trample on the 4/4 doesn't help me attack that much better than the Pet Avengers does. And I would rather have Pet Avengers' power-up ability than Abomination's for later turns. At rare, we have the Serpent Society, the 1 black-green 3/4 with Death Touch. It's a rare Death Toucher, so again, it fights well. And you know, if you're fighting with your 3/4 against opponents like annoying 1/4 Spider Woman or something like that, then it's going to win the fight just with Death Touch. And also, if you're already touching black, then and you Serpent Society has that ability whenever another creature you control with Death Touch dies, each opponent sacrifices a non-token creature of their choice. So it plays well with Serpent Specialist. If I have Serpent Society, I'm more likely to want Serpent Specialist in these decks. But Ward get 5 poison counters, so if they want to remove Serpent Society, well, you're already touching black, and then maybe you rebuy it with that black return spell that we saw earlier. And now your opponent can't deal with it without killing themselves. At Mythic, we have the Incredible Hulk. That's the flip side of the blue Bruce Banner card. Even if you just treat it as a red-green card, 2 red, red, green, green, 8/8, reach trample. When it's dealt damage, not necessarily in combat, fight spell counts. Put a +1/+1 counter on him. If he's attacking, untap him, and there's additional combat phase after this phase. But, you know, you can play Incredible Hulk and then on a later turn play a fight spell, or if it's, you know, already turn 8 or something, then play a 1 or 2 mana fight spell, and then it's a 9/9 reach trample that your opponent doesn't want to block, because that additional combat phase thing triggers even if the Incredible Hulk dies. So keep that in mind. And then the Sensational She-Hulk is the flip side of Jennifer Walters. So it does require double white to splash Sensational She-Hulk, but you know, you might be playing something like the Baxter Building uncommon land that lets you filter 4 mana. Yeah, by spending 5 mana, you might be playing like Shang-Chi, the rare that lets you use but that's for creature abilities, so Shang-Chi wouldn't really help you here. But anyway, we've already talked about green having lots of ways of fixing, and so you may very well be able to pull off the double white. And Sensational She-Hulk is an even better fighter than Incredible Hulk because it doesn't require that the Sensational She-Hulk be attacking. That's the 3 green, white, white, reach trample, 6/6. That your opponents can't cast spells during your turn, which makes them not able to blow out your fight spells and things like that. So she helps the plan. And whenever a creature you control is dealt damage, her or someone else, and by the way, how do you get dealt damage? By fighting. You may have the Sensational She-Hulk deal that much damage to any target. Do this only once each turn. That's an even better pairing with the kind of deck we're building than the Incredible Hulk is, but they're both great. Other fight spells, because Wolverine can fight more than once, you know, we talked about that earlier. Wolverine's ability to fight and then heal and then attack doesn't just apply to his own Enter's ability. We have Go Nuts at common, the single green sorcery with Teamwork 3. Choose one or both if you cast using Teamwork. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and target creature you control fights target creature an opponent controls. It's a common that fights and pumps, which means it helps creatures win the fight. Teamwork 3 plays great with Wolverine. Wolverine already has 3 power, so even if you're not going to attack with Wolverine, a lot of times you can bring in Wolverine, cast Wolverine immediately after, then Wolverine fights, and then you can have Wolverine fight again because the damage from the first fight will be healed. You could cast Go Nuts and tap Wolverine, and so for 5 mana you can have Wolverine enter, fight twice, kill 2 things. All of a sudden Wolverine is a 4/6 in the future, attacks better. Great. A rare that pairs really well is Epic Fight, and this card goes later than a lot of removal spells. Epic Fight is the 2 and a green sorcery, choose one or both. No teamwork, just pick. Double target creature's power and toughness until end of turn, and then target creature you control fights target creature an opponent controls. It pairs really well. I mean, you know, you make Wolverine a 6/10, and then it fights and basically kills anything. And then they can't block to deal the rest of the damage because Wolverine will just heal. So a lot of times it just becomes a 2-for-1. They have to block Wolverine, stop the 6 damage maybe. And of course, Epic Fight works just great with Hulks and the other Tramplers. And then, I mean, Superhero Civil War, it's a great card, and we know this, right? Mode 3 is 2 creatures fight, and you're usually having your opponent's creatures fight each other, but if you have a deck that's already built well for fighting, that 3rd chapter goes even better. And then bite spells, because you're going to have aggressive creatures with high power. Think like Ant-Man's Army, 3/2, right? Just a common. Aggressive creatures with high power have more vicious bites. So in red, we have Hulk Smash, the 1 in a red instant with Teamwork 4, that you either destroy target non-creature artifact, which could be your opponent's equipment, which helps you win fights or have them survive the bite worse, or target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature an opponent controls, and if you Teamwork 4, you choose both. So you can, if you have creatures that are good at fighting, they're often good at biting too. And then we have Punishing Punch, the 2 and a green instant at uncommon. Costs 2 less if there are 2 or more creature cards in your graveyard. If you have a creature-heavy deck, that's likely to happen just through natural attrition. Your opponent's going to have to block you sometime or remove your stuff. Target creature you control deals damage equal to twice its power to target creature an opponent controls. Wolverine loves that because Wolverine's 3 power can sometimes be a liability, but that does a lot more when it's 6. And so, here are Wolverine, Fierce Fighter, and the friends that we've talked about in this episode. As always, I have the sealeddeck.tech link to this limited principle skeleton that I will post in the show notes, and you can follow it and go take a look at some of the cards and move things around yourself. I always include the entire set, in this case Marvel Superheroes, of cards at the top of that sealed deck.tech link for your convenience. So if you want to drag cards in and out and experiment yourself with this skeleton, you certainly can. And then I wanted to show you also 3 recent trophy decks from 17 lands that were in red-green. So the first one we're looking at here was at Platinum rank, and it was splashing white for removal, a Murdoch's Crusade and a supervillain lockup, and also a hero in training. So it was splashing 3 white cards. And among the cards that we talked about today that were in this deck, and all of these decks have Wolverine, by the way. The vast majority of red-green trophy decks have Wolverine in them. But key cards we talked about today that you saw here, 3 Undercover Scrolls, obviously great for ramping to Wolverine, 1 Stark Industries Executive, an Ant-Man's Army, a Pet Avengers, Abomination, 2 Hulk Gamma Goliath. That's an uncommon we didn't talk about, but that's just the Hulk that has the power up to become an 11/10 and grow huge. And 2 Savage Land Dinosaurs, the green land cycler at the top, which are helping to splash for green. That deck went 7 and 2. Trophy deck number 2 at Mythic was splashing black just for the Ruinous Wrecking Crew, the X Black Red rare with 4 modes, really good. Again, cards we talked about today that were in this deck, Stark Industries Executive and Serpent Specialist, the red and the green 1-drops. A single Undercover Scroll, 3 copies of Ant-Man's Army, 2 copies of Abomination, Wolverine, Fierce Fighter, and again, 2 green land cyclers at the top. One of the things you'll notice about these decks is they're not overrun with rares. There's lots of commons and uncommons in them. The Wolverine is like the rare that's holding things together. And I mean, this one also has Ruinous Wrecking Crew. It's splashing for a good rare with a single black pit. But it's not like this deck is running on 5 or 6 rares. You can get there with just the right combination of commons and uncommons. This deck was 7-0 at Mythic. And then trophy deck number 3 was another deck at Mythic rank that had no splash, only red and green cards. And what did this have going for it? It had 2 copies of Rapid Rescue, the mill and put a permanent in your hand. It has 2 copies of Photon Blast Barrage and a Red Hulk, so it's got the combo in there, and I'm sure that won some games. But you can't build a deck just depending on that combo. That's an alternate win condition that just happens to play well with also Wolverine. It has 2 Undercover Scrolls, 1 Hulk Smash. It has Avengers Disassembled to wipe the board of little stuff, but that also damages Red Hulk, so that's cool. It has an Ant-Man's Army. It has an Abomination. It has a She-Hulk. It has a Wolverine. A couple of Wakandan Royal Guards because there's a number of the cards that has enough density of heroes to add a couple counters. Wakandan Royal Guard, we didn't talk much about that today, but it's a good curve from Wolverine at 4 into 5 because Wakandan Royal Guard, Wolverine's a hero, so Wakandan Royal Guard can come in at 5 and put 2 counters on Wolverine, and Wolverine is now a 5/7 that heals itself. Very nice. That was at Mythic also, and that deck went, I think, 7-2. And I would encourage you to go to 17 Lands and explore some more red-green trophy decks after this episode. It's a good exercise to go through to see what's in common between these decks. You're going to see a lot of the cards that we talked about today. So, takeaways. Wolverine Fierce Fighter is a very splashable card, but there are arguments it's best in red-green. It improves red-green more than any other color pair. It adds 11.9% to the normal win rate of red-green. It's very, very, very good card, and first picking it is a reason to lean red-green, knowing that you have outs. If you don't see the red-green cards that you need, even though you have a very good chance of seeing them because of the color pair being underdrafted, if you don't see them, it's okay, because you know that Wolverine is easily splashed. But if you can play it in red-green, it helps you to play it on curve or even before. You'd love to play Wolverine on curve or even before, draft your deck accordingly. So if you are going to splash it, you would still love to be able to have a way of playing Wolverine on turn 4. You need an aggressive plan because you don't have the same late-game bombs as the others. We talked about that. And because you're green, you can and often should splash other powerful cards. If you look through the last 100 trophy decks in red-green base on 17 lands, you will see 75 to 80% of them are splashing at least one other color, usually only one. And it's pretty evenly distributed between splashing white, splashing black, and splashing blue. You just, when you find bombs or A or high B level cards in other colors, especially if you need more unconditional removal than red and green provide you, that's a great reason to do that. So, that's the rundown on Wolverine Fierce Fighter. Thank you very much for joining us for episode 4. As always, this episode will be posted on YouTube and also on Spotify and Apple and all the podcast networks. Best place for comments is to comment on the YouTube video, and I'd encourage you, if you don't have another way to watch the video version, you'll be able to see all the slides and all the pictures of the cards. Pause and look at text if you need to. But you can also visit Limited Principles on Twitter, i.e. X, and also on Blue Sky, as you see there. You can follow the QR code there and buy me a coffee if you would like to donate something to the cause. But the best thing you can do is subscribe and like and comment and grow the podcast. happy to do these, and as always, happy to receive requests for if you'd like to see the rundown and the research for a particular rare or mythic or even high-level uncommon. I'm happy to take requests as we get later into the format. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time for Limited Principles.